This is Mrs. Grieser, and we are looking at the solution to the Disneyland Disney World question, which you may recall from the last video, which if you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and watch it. I went to Disneyland and I challenged you to figure out the percent of change between the areas of the Space Mountains in Disneyland and Disney World. First, we went to Disneyland in California, where we decided to measure the distance between two ribs in the roof of Space Mountain to help us figure out the circumference. And once you get the circumference, you get the radius. And once you have the radius, you can figure out the area. Since I didn't have a proper measuring tool with me, I used my feet. So we used the units of Grieser feet, and I found a place in the interior where I could count off the measure of Grieser feet between two ribs. Then we flew over to Florida and went to Disney World's Magic Kingdom, where we found their Space Mountain. And then we also attempted to measure the distance between the two ribs on the roof of that Space Mountain. And so we came up with a number for that. So here's what we came up with. In Disneyland, there were 21 Grieser feet between each spoke or rib of the roof of Space Mountain, and there were 36 total ribs in the roof. In Disney World, there were 15.75 Grieser feet between the ribs and 72 total ribs. So this information can be used to find the radius of each Space Mountain, and once you have the radius, you can find the area. And then I challenge you to go ahead and find the percent of change between those two areas.
Have you figured it out? Let's take a look at the solution.
Okay, let's see if we can work out this percent of change. We went to Disneyland first, so maybe we should work on that one for a start. And we calculated there were 21 Grieser feet between the ribs, and there were 36 ribs. So the circumference is approximately 21 times 36, which is 756 Grieser feet, and that's your circumference. So since circumference is 2 pi r, we can solve for r, which would be circumference over 2 pi. Since we know our circumference, it's 756. We divide that by 2 pi, and I just put it in parentheses here to remind us that you would need to do that in a calculator. And I get approximately 120 Grieser feet for the radius. And once I know the radius, I can figure out area, because that's area equals pi r squared. So I just substitute in that 120 for r. Remember the order of operations. You have to do that 120 squared first. So that would be 14400 pi, which is approximately 45,239 square Grieser feet. And that would be the area of the Disneyland Space Mountain. Let's see if we can work this out for Disney World. And it will be in a similar fashion there. So let's see, how many Grieser feet between those ribs? I believe we found 15.75 Grieser feet between each set of ribs, and there were 72 ribs, many more, in Disney World. So I can find its circumference, which would be 15.75 times 72, which came out to 1,134 Grieser feet. Again, that's circumference. Since circumference is 2 pi r, r is still going to be circumference over 2 pi. So the r for Disney World's Space Mountain is 1134 divided by 2 pi, which that came out to be approximately 180.5 Grieser feet, and that was the radius. So we can calculate its area to be pi r squared, or pi times 180.5 squared. And again, square that 180.5 first. It came out to 32,580.25 pi, which is approximately 102,354 square Grieser feet. Now that you have the two areas, you need to figure out the percent of change between these areas. Okay, so now that we've worked out the areas, we can figure out the percent of change. So if you forgot how to figure out percent of change, it's basically the difference of two numbers, and then you divide by that original number that you're starting with as a way to make it a percent. So the formula is kind of your new value minus the old value, and then you divide by the old value. Now, when you have two numbers, how do you know which one's the new value? And it actually doesn't matter that much. Now, I tend to take my new number to be the bigger one, so that when I subtract this number minus this one, and then divide by the old number, which is this one, you get a positive number. But you could have gone the other way, it doesn't matter. But going this way, I did 102,354. I said that's my new area, because when I went to Disney World it was second. And then the old value that we had was the Disneyland value, so 45,239. And then the old value was still that 45,239. So I put that in my calculator, and I was careful because you want to make sure that you put this in first, hit enter, or put parentheses around them when you're in your calculator, and then divide by that second number there. But when I did that, I got, what did I get? 126% as my percent of change. Actually, it came out to 1.26. But again, I want it to be a percent, so I multiplied by 100. Now, if you went the other way, if you went this 45,239, it's not letting it be right on here, 45,239 minus 102,354, your old number then is the 102,354. I think it came out to be approximately 56%, or 0.56, and we made it a percent. If you think about it, it's really telling me the same thing. This is a negative. So this is saying more than or less than half the size of the original. And if I'm looking at this number of 126, that is more than twice the size. The one in Disney World, basically that one is more than twice the size of the one in Disneyland. And this was like perplexing me a bit, because when I was thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know, when I was standing next to these buildings, they looked about the same size. So I actually looked into it. The ride at Disneyland, this one, it has one track in there. So you're always riding on one track. Now, when they built Disney World, which actually was the first one, they built two tracks in it. And they had a lot more space at Disney World, so they made it super big, and they put two tracks in, whereas they had less space in Disneyland. Disneyland is a much smaller park, so they only put in one track. So when I realized that, I'm like, aha, that makes sense. So the one in Disney World, area anyway, is more than twice the size of the one in Disneyland. So there you have it, the area of the Space Mountain in Disney World, more than twice the size of the one in Disneyland. Now, if you're the kind of person who likes a challenge, well, you might want to use these in regular feet, the 12-inch kind. So one Grieser foot, I measured that shoe, and it is 10 inches long. So if you want a challenge, figure it out in normal imperial feet and see if you get the same percent of change, or at least close to it, to see how good our calculations were.